This is a very fearsome horse, or afraid horse, I guess. Looking at more battles, more games and systems in the Age of Reason that are not bar. And as you can see here, it's our old friends via Victis. This is the rather new Les Batailles de Louis XIV, Louis XIV, 1703, L'année de victoire, year of victory. This is a game it's in a system, as far as I understand it, that has existed for quite a while, 8 or 9 years, I think, and covers all sorts of eras. Mostly the battles have appeared in magazines, via Victis magazines. Some of them kind of older, I guess. But this is a folio of a pair of battles in this same system. It's designed by Nicholas Strategos. And this is War of Spanish Succession. So a little bit earlier in the Age of Reason, I guess you would say, but still right up there. A lot of the Via Victis magazine games are 7 Years' War, and then the very first game in this series, if you could call it that, was the victories of Marshal de Saxe, and that was War of Austrian Succession. That game is really, really hard to find. I really hope they reprint it, but if anyone's got a lead on that title, I would really like to own it. So, you know, hit me up, let me know. Yeah, so that game also is 2 battles, and it comes in a folio like this. I think that one is Luffield and I'm blanking on the other battle that came in that one. This is Hochstadt and Speyerbach. And as you can see, I've kind of started to set up the game. This is a different system than anything we've looked at yet. And if the map looks familiar, it's because it's the same artist as Jour de Gloire. But of course, we are 100 years earlier than Jour de Gloire. But you know, the same charming details on the terrain and the houses. This scenario, so there's two battles, like I said. I decided that I was going to start with Speyerbach, just because there's less special rules, and it's a shorter game. It's only 6 to 8 turns rather than 10, and so I figured that might be a good way to learn the system. Additionally, mostly open terrain, don't have to worry about the complexities there. This is a system, again, that is going to cover linear warfare of the 18th century, and this is the early 18th century, and early days of the War of Spanish Succession. And so I wanted to give it a shot. And then when this is done, I got one more game that I would like to experiment with, and then I would like to do a compare and contrast of all of these systems that I have played. Piacenza, Camposanto 1743, this, and the other system. So like most Via Victis games, the rules do come in English. There's a lot to take in here. I will say, having read this, the rules are not as clean as Jour de Gloire. Typos, some stuff is translated weirdly. It's a little bit confusing, but I'm hoping that I can make sense of it if, after I play it. So, what more do I have to say? I think that's probably like what you really need to know. I will get into the mechanics and so forth as we get there. But the Battle of Speyerbach, which is, here's the town of Speyer, and this is a Holy Roman Imperial Army here, kind of near the town. I believe Speyer is where they found the Speyer wine bottle, incidentally, which is a stopped wine bottle from ancient Rome that still had the wine in it, which is an incredible archaeological find, a crazy story. If you want to know about that, you should go look it up. The Speyer wine bottle, it never ceases to amaze me. So, here we have the Imperial Army under the command of Hessen Cassel over here. Nice wig on that man. And below him is one of his wing commanders, and that is Nassau Weilinger or something like that. I'm just going to call him Nassau. So we've got the Imperial Army. What has happened here is that the French, who are not on the board yet, have stolen a march against the Imperial Army. The Imperial Army is frantically trying to array for battle. And here you can see the setup for this scenario. There are 2 scenarios for this battle. There's the historical sort of battle scenario, which is 8 turns. It starts on turn 3, I believe, or turn 2, something like that. And then there's the sort of approach to battle scenario, which starts with the French not on the map, and they will come in from this side of the board. I decided I wanted to do the approach to battle scenario to see. I always find the maneuver elements of battle games more interesting than the combat elements, especially in linear warfare where it tends to get locked in. So I wanted to give the French and myself as a player the opportunity to approach the battlefield in a way that I wanted rather than what was historically set up. So we've got, for the Imperial Army, we've got 4 wings. We've got the wing under Spiegel. We've got the wing under, oh God, I'm sorry about the focus. The wing under, come on. The wing under Tetau. And then we've got the wing under Velen down here. And as I already mentioned, we have Nassau up here in the town of Speyer. Now you'll notice that all of these units have grand disorder markers on them. That's because in their haste to array for battle, the army was completely disorganized along its sort of left flank and center. The only Imperial units up here that are in any sort of orderly formation are all of the cavalry under Spiegel, some of them here in Dudenhofen, but the rest of the army is going to have to get its act together as the French start approaching from the west. We've got 3 French wings. Here you can see, and then some of the artillery that are going to be with them. That's mostly the infantry and really good infantry at that. That is under, let's take a look at his name, Clérambault. And then we have got some further infantry and cavalry here, and artillery under, God, why is the font so tiny? Locmaria. And then down here we've got the French cavalry under the command of Pracontal. So, and I believe there should be a French army commander. Not sure who the French army commander is. It looks like they only have wings. That doesn't make sense. There might, so again, this is where the rules have kind of have failed me. The scenarios are supposed to specify who the army commander is, but it doesn't. It just has Locmaria, Clérambault, yeah, and Pracontal. I'll have to check in on that. In any case, what we are trying to do. So until turn 4, they're going to have to fight. Starting on turn 4, the Imperial Army will be able to withdraw from the map using these roads. They'll be able to cross the Speyerbach River and exit the map if they want. Now, the reason they want to do that is because when you eliminate units in this game, it counts as morale, the morale of the formation. So each wing has its own morale level that is equal to the total combined combat strength of the unit. So if we look here, this Saxe-Gotha combat unit has 4 strength points. Then it's unit type, which means it's a dragoon. That's what the little dragon means. He's mounted. 3 morale, 6 movement points. The one next to him, we've got some heavier cavalry. He's got 4 strength, 5 morale, 6 movement points. And those little cross swords next to the 4 means that he can melee combat. The infantry has got similar stuff. What I really think is interesting about the system is that you've got different types of units based on their sort of firing doctrine. So you can see here these 2 units with the little 9x9 or 3x3 little dots below their combat strength. That means they're fire by platoon. They're not allowed to engage in melee. But someone like here at Hirschfeld, he's got the 4 dots below his combat strength. He is allowed to melee because he fires in line formation. So it's really interesting. There's lots of different unit types. 3 different kinds of cavalry, 4 different kinds of infantry, and then you've got these little symbols on the counters to signify some special tactics they may have. Sometimes cavalry have pistols, and they're allowed to shoot, sort of like, 30 Years War style, or Wars of Religion style. In general, I get like a strong musket and pike vibe from the rules as I've read these, and it should be interesting to see how it plays out on the table. So what are we trying to accomplish with all of this? Trying to demoralize enemy wings. If you can demoralize enemy wings and not be demoralized yourself, you're going to win a certain type of victory. If you demoralize the whole army, that's a, what do they call that? It's a operational victory. If you demoralize a couple of the wings, it's a tactical victory. And then each side can win sort of those that type of victory. So it's hard to really explain the game until we get into contact. So I'm just going to go ahead and start playing, and I hope you'll follow with me as we fight the Battle of Speyerbach, 1703. I had to look through the scenario setup for this battle, and the only thing I can surmise, and actually the other battle as well, the only thing I can surmise is that the French overall commander is Tallard, who is in the history of this battle, and his counter is not listed anywhere in any of the scenario setups for the French. So I have to believe Tallard is the French overall commander here. You have to have one in order to be in command for your formations and wings. And in every other scenario, it specifies that they can be with wherever the player wants. And because the French are entering the map and they're not here, I'm going to assume that Tallard can be with whatever unit he wants to be with. So it's just stuff like that I'm finding in the rules, just a lot of really confusing things. The translation wasn't great, which is a surprise to me coming from Jour de Gloire, where it was excellent. So that's a little bit disappointing, but we're going to go with the fact that Tallard historically was at the battle, I believe, and he has a counter, and it's not listed anywhere, so Tallard it is. First turn of Speyerbach is over. Pretty simple turn, no combats, a lot of maneuver, except for the Imperial Army, obviously. The French 3 wings are coming in sort of between these hexes here. You can see that the French cavalry taking its spot on the left. I'm doing this a bit ahistorically, I believe, from where the positions were, or at least where they ended up. But I did send the French left flank cavalry up here, seeing that we have some British cavalry up here. Cavalry in the Age of Reason, really only good against other cavalry. So we're going to try and bring them up here and just hold this flank. This is not where the majority of action is probably going to be. The Imperials have kept their dragoons in cavalry and mounted in cavalry formation just because they're a little bit better when they are mounted in terms of their combat power, and we don't want to necessarily challenge the French advance, although maybe I should have, thinking about it, dismounted them and moved them up as sort of a skirmishing line. I might change my mind on that because the Imperials went second. The rest of the Imperial Army is frantically trying to get in order. If you are not in an enemy zone of control, you automatically improve from whatever disorder level you're at to 1 better. So they are now in regular disorder rather than grand disorder. And we have the Imperial Commander-in-Chief come down here, Hesse-Cassel, and into Bergenhausen. He's going to next turn try and move so that he can put most of these formations in command. It's really critical, actually, that the center is in command because this is where the best units are, and there's a commander missing from part of that center that needs to get down here as well. The rest of the French army is approaching here south of Schwegenheim, between Schwegenheim and Lingenfeld. They're in column march, as you can see. They've got big guns coming up behind them. This is the bulk of the French infantry, very powerful. You can see 8 strength there with these all melee capable units, pretty well trained. We're going to figure out where we want to go. Unfortunately, the infantry is slow enough that they're probably not going to be able to reach the disordered front in time, unless perhaps, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, even if I do a column march with them, they will be able to get there in time. However, the French cavalry on the right here will be able to reach elements of the Imperial front on this next movement phase. So we're going to have our first combats. In particular, we have some artillery over here that I will need to protect, and I may actually do a move to get some of my infantry moved down to protect that artillery, or maybe move the artillery, because the French cavalry is approaching pretty fast, and if they just attack a cavalry or a artillery unit, it gets eliminated. So I may rejigger this a little bit, but this is what's coming. We have our first engagement along the line. This is the French right flank cavalry attempting to come out of these woods along this road here and around these woods down this clear field and charge the Imperial line. Imperial cavalry countercharge, which is why you see them move forward. So we're going to have a good old-fashioned cavalry against cavalry battle here. So each unit must attack all units within its zone of control, except if another unit is going to attack one of those units. So as we see here, we've got 2 paired-off cavalry engagements with these cavalry squadrons. We'll start with the bottom one first. So first of all, you look at the ratio of the two. You look at the top number. So 3 to 3. There's no modifiers there. This is a D6 with modifier system. You look at the morale difference. So Silly's 2nd Cavalry here has a 4. This Imperial troop has a 3, so we're at +1 for the French. You look at if you're attacking from like a flank. I'm not doing that, obviously. We're in terrain. We're in clear terrain, so there's no like combat effects there. If heavy cavalry, which is the cavalry with the galloping sign here, is fighting against pistol cavalry, which is happening here, then it's -1. So as you can see, we've got the little icon, we've got the heavy cavalry versus sort of like more lighter cavalry. So we're back down to 0. I believe it's negative. And then if the attacker is disorganized, -1. If the defender is disorganized, which they are, +1. So back to the French +1. And no, not everyone is light. No one's in a town. No one's. We don't have dismounted dragoons or grenadiers. Commander's not present. Demoralized formations, no. And against the unit march column, no. So yeah, it looks like it's just going to be a +1 for the French, I believe. And we're going to roll the d6, so let's see how it goes. We rolled a 2, plus 1 is a 3. The results of that are both sides must make a morale test with no modifier. So we're going to roll against each of these units' morale numbers. French need a 4 or less. The Imperials need a 3 or less. If they were still in great disorder, they would have a chance to be eliminated. So let's see what we get. The French passed the morale. The Imperials did not pass the morale. So I need to know what happens. All right, so what happens is when you fail your morale test, you gain a level of disorder. So Victis' cavalry here becomes grand disordered again. And so that's the first combat. No retreats, nothing like that. They're just disordered. So now we're going to check this combat and see the result there. Ultimately, the result of this combat here was another level of disorder, so back into grand disorder. And then this unit also took a hit. So we put a hit marker under it. And then when the number of hits equals the one on the back, you flip the counter over. So there's multiple steps per unit in this game. It reminds me a bit of... I played another game recently where this happened, where step losses were hits beneath. Actually, it reminds me a little bit of Campo Santo, 1743. So multiple step units in one counter. So its value now is -1, so it's only a 2 strength now. When it takes another hit, then we'll flip it over and remove the hit markers. So that's the way you track hits in this game in unit degradation. It had to retreat. Now, this cavalry must advance if it unless it passes a morale check, in which case it doesn't have to advance. We need a 4. Let's roll the die. It rolled a 6, so it did not pass. So this cavalry must advance into here. And so that is the first melee engagement of the battle. As you can see, the left flank approaching, but not quite fast enough to get there. And we have yet to activate the French center, and we're going to do that now. So one thing here where the rules are a little unclear, and there's a bunch of these little exceptions or rules throughout the translated rulebook that don't make sense, but well, I mean, they make sense, but they're kind of nebulous. But basically, after I did these attacks, before I was able to do the shock, you actually have to do a morale test. Anytime you shock in this game, apparently you must do a morale test. Now, I did retroactively roll the morale test. Both of my units passed, so nothing changes about this. This is actually what happened. But the rules say, after implementing fire, under certain circumstances, the attacking infantry unit or stack may engage the defender in shock. That seems to imply that only infantry have to make a morale test to shock. However, later on in that rules section, it says cavalry... If cavalry contacts or charges cavalry, there is no shot combat, like range combat, and the shock combat is resolved like in 10.3. So actually, maybe cavalry don't need to make a morale test. I don't know. It's very unclear, but I just wanted to point out, if you're familiar with the system, I did roll a morale check just to be sure, and it came out the same. After reading it again, I'm going to just make a decision. Because it specifically says... if cavalry contacts or charges cavalry, shock combat is resolved like in 10.3. 10.3 is the shock combat procedure. So I'm going to assume that means that there is no morale check for cavalry, and that where it says shock here, attacking infantry unit or stack may engage the defender in shock and then do a morale test. I'm going to assume the rules organization imply that it is infantry only must make a morale test to shock. Okay, now we're going to have our very first range combat. Shot combat is what they call it in this game. So this dismounted dragoon here, Leiningen, who's in this town here, is going to shoot at the recently advanced cavalry because it's the Imperial turn, and I should turn this over because he's activating. So you can see that we've retreated, we've backed up our cavalry out of the engagement of these cavalry, trying to get them to reorganize, hopefully next turn after the French go. And we're going to hope that this dismounted dragoon can drive off the attackers. So we looked at the modifiers, we roll a die, and what's cool about the combat table is depending on sort of the tactics of the unit that's firing. So here we've got pistol cavalry. Here we've got dragoons, line infantry, shot by a platoon, and artillery. You just look at the column of the unit type, and then you add the modifiers to see what happens. So we're at -1 on this one with the light dragoons, or the dismounted dragoons, and I dropped the die. All right, I recovered the die. We've rolled it. We rolled a 5. -1 is a 4. We come over here to the table. 4 is a morale test for the French cavalry. He is a 4. And we passed the morale test, so nothing going on there. The fire was ineffective, and we continue with the turn. And that is the end of turn 2. The French cavalry making contact, the center moving up slowly because they're infantry, and then we're going to have some more cavalry skirmishing over here. The Imperials have gotten their commanders, their wing commanders, and their overall commander into the fight. I thought about potentially moving this line forward just to have more space to retreat. We do have to protect these bridges because eventually we're going to want to, as the battle goes, get our units probably off the map if it starts to go badly for the Imperials. And this turn, starting with turn 3, which we're about to do right now, the French continue to have the initiative. Last turn that is a certainty, then it'll be a roll-off. And we definitely want to make sure that we get the Imperial guns on this turn in position. We can start stacking units now. And there's some additional rules about stacking units. Namely, the unit on top is always the one that's firing and taking combat results. And artillery is now going to be able to stack with units, and so we'll be able to do some things like reaction fire and some other stuff coming up. So French have completed their half of turn 3, and mostly good news for them. You can see that the battle lines are forming pretty close here. We had more cavalry attacks here. We routed one of the Imperial cavalry. We caused some huge disorder to the dismounted dragoons infantry that's in that hex there. This artillery was traversed by the routing unit. They became disordered. We had more attacks along here. We had mutual disorder of Imperial and French cavalry. So it's been a lot of cavalry action early in this game. This French artillery is trying to come up here into one of these hexes, probably that one underneath the leader, the wing commander, so it can start firing and open up this right flank, or this left flank of the Imperials, right flank for the French. The Imperials definitely probably want to pull back from here. This is probably not holdable at this point, and if the cavalry gets in through here, they're going to be able to wrap up this line very effectively. Thankfully, it is the Imperials' turn coming up, so they can potentially pull back their line. I'm guessing what's going to happen is they're going to want to pull back this way and kind of hold the gap between kind of this area so that their front is narrower, so that the French can't bring as much force to bear, because if they lose this, it's going to be game over. We did have some French attacks up here on the Imperial right, but they were repulsed, as you can see, both French units taking some disorder. Some really high-quality cavalry here that the Imperials are employing to hold this flank. The French actually dismounted one of their dragoons units to close in, same with the Imperials here. So we're going to get some more, a little bit more classic infantry on infantry action coming up shortly. Battle continues to unfold here at Speyerbach. The Imperial line has withdrawn on the left in the face of the French advance, trying to get to better positions, trying to recover some of those units. Fortunately, these dragoons, these dismounted dragoons, were only able to back up to there, so they're kind of anchoring the flank in a really disordered status. Not too happy about that. The French cavalry is going to be able to come around here pretty easily. I could have left them, one of the options I have is I could have left them here. They'd be out of command, but they would slow the French down, but probably most likely be overrun. But the more important thing is they would prevent, I might do that. I might just leave them behind. They would prevent the French cavalry from being able to charge forward until I get my line set up in a more better way here. Okay, sorry guys, you're the speed bump. The battle is well and truly engaged here as we finish the 2 p.m. turn 4. Heading to the turn 5 turn of the game. It's actually playing pretty quick, which I do like. The Imperials had a really great second half of that turn. The French army kind of slammed into the Imperial lines. Other than this left flank, which did successfully manage to extricate itself and pull back into a more defensible formation, the Imperial center actually put the hurt on the French quite heavily. Ended up routing one of the big French infantry units, line infantry, that was in this area here, disordered a couple of more. I mean, the Imperials did take some disorders themselves, but we've gotten casualties on a lot of these units across the line. And then up here in the north, Spiegel's right-wing cavalry, while disordered, did manage to drive off some of the other French units that were in their sort of purview. And a big part of the reason the Imperials' pushback was so successful this turn was because their artillery is finally online. They were able to get it into a position, unlimber it, and do some fire. And the big 12-pound guns, if they're right next to a unit, point-blank fire, it is real nasty. So we did have a couple of those shots come across. the French lines. One of the things I'm noticing here is that now that we're rolling for initiative, the double turn where you go second and then go first in the next turn can be huge. So if the Imperials here can win the start of turn die roll, which I'm about to do, they might be able to take the initiative of this battle and, you know, continue to like sort of disrupt the French advance. So let's see what we get on this. That is going to be an Imperial. Yeah, that's going to be Imperials go first turn. Coming up here. So that should be pretty interesting. That's going to give them a chance to rally and then press the attack. All right, we are beginning turn 6, and the French have just scored the dreaded double turn. They went second on turn 5. They're going to seize the initiative, I guess, and go first on turn 6. They did manage to rally a bunch of these units across the line. Turn 5 was a lot of action, a lot of volleys fired back and forth across the center. The French were actually pretty disorganized, but they managed to rally at the beginning of turn 6 and recover. You can see that the Imperials under Batailles are managing to stay pretty disciplined. There are step losses under here, but for the most part, it's a lot of exchange of fires. No one side wants to make an assault against one another, and that seems pretty historic to me. You're in an open field. The one area where this game differs from Piacenza is that you can do melee attacks in the clear. In Piacenza, you could not. And there was some historical justification given for that choice in Piacenza, and that is not here. So I will talk more about that in my final thoughts of this system once I'm done with the other battle. But just to let you know, you are allowed to melee much more frequently in this game than you were in Piacenza. The French left has pulled back a little bit. They've got their artillery under here, under Placontal, and that's going to start firing this turn, so that's going to be a big deal. The French did catch 2 cavalry units, actually, who failed their morale test after a successful attack. And so they're a little bit overextended now. I was looking up the history of this battle, and it's played out essentially historically with what's happened here. There was the French cavalry arrived first and kind of drove a wedge into this wing. I think if anything in the game, as the Imperial player, I have managed to form up and prevent that breakthrough that separated the left flank from the rest of the Imperial army. But everything else is happening pretty much on schedule in terms of even when like the artillery came online, the effect of the artillery, how the flanks, like the outcomes of the flanks combat. So I'm pretty impressed with that. I don't know if it's scripted, doesn't feel scripted, but certainly the system is generating historical results. Speaking of the cavalry flanks, we've pulled back the French cavalry to reform a line. We've got some disordered Imperials in here. These Dragoons, I think, might make a melee attack. These are both pretty weak units. And then obviously there's a 12-pound gun under here that just came up that's going to fire into the flank of that cavalry, which is going to be very nasty. The Imperials have already lost a couple of units. You can see we've lost some Dragoons. We lost a cavalry unit down here. That cavalry loss coming from a flank attack down on the very outer right flank with Silly and Puignon. I can't read that upside down, but basically on the other side of Mechtersheimerhof, we had a sort of cavalry battle, eliminated, flanked a cavalry, eliminated it. This cavalry unit is in real big trouble, and then this wing now is going to press forward, and you can see that there's a lot of, there's a reduced cavalry unit here, hugely disordered. This left flank is going to come unhinged here pretty quickly. Now this formation, that left flank, is demoralized, so that means that their morale values are decreased by 1. They're not allowed to enter zones of control. So yeah, like the real battle, it's coming a little bit unhinged. I think the Imperial player, depending on how it goes with the rest of the field, are going to have to try and pull back and make for the river to withdraw in an orderly fashion. I just think they've stood in there pretty well so far, but they're taking way more punishment than the French is taking, and I think that's going to ultimately be their undoing if they don't do something about it. Yeah, you're starting to see now the wear and tear on the line after 7 hours of, well, really 5 hours of engagement, 4 or 5 hours of engagement. The Imperials sensing which way the wind is blowing, trying to pull back, trying very hard to pull back in the face of this assault. A bunch of the Imperial artillery down here did actually do some hits to this cavalry, but they're gearing up for a cavalry charge next turn. And they're just trying to back up. They're just trying to disengage. It's really hard to disengage from the enemy when they've got the momentum. The French center under Nassau has been doing a great job disordering the French line, but it's unfortunately on the right, Tallard versus, well, what used to be Taitau has devolved and is sort of opening up this center part of the battlefield. Taitao actually took a casualty from some fire from these French line infantry, so his aide-de-camp is taken over. It's not good for their activation chances. We've got units routing behind them. They're trying to withdraw in an orderly, somewhat orderly fashion. We tried to disengage up here with Spiegel's cavalry. One of those cavalry was completely annihilated by these 12-pound guns, the one that was caught out in no man's land. So it's looking pretty ugly. Here's the eliminated units pile for the Allies, the Imperial Army. They lost their grenadiers as well. So, yeah, it looks like the French are on their way to a victory. We've got 2 more turns. We'll play it out. Well, by the end of 5 p.m., it's looking like a rout. The Imperial Army is in complete disarray. The French basically surrounding them here. We've had a lot more casualties for the Imperials. Some units, the ones that are sideways, have routed off the map. One thing I'm uncertain about, it says that if the Imperial units cross the river at one of the bridges, they're considered to have retreated from the battle at half the morale value for their formation. But if they retreat off the map, like, they have to move 3 hexes. So I don't know if you would just stop on the other side of the river or keep going. It's unclear in the scenario rules what it means if you retreat, when you go across the river, like if you just retreated there and stayed there or what. So I'm treating them as if they routed off the map across the river, that it was considered half the morale value. Someone correct me if I'm wrong there, but most of the formations here, including some artillery, have taken major losses across the line, and Hesse-Cassel is just trying to get everyone withdrawn. You see the Imperials withdrew from the front, the line, essentially in a sort of a confusing mass as the 2 flanks came together with the center. This aide-de-camp is still valiantly trying to fight, trying to get out of there. He couldn't withdraw without taking a casualty, because he'd be in the front zone of control of one of these units that's flanking him. And it's just all coming undone. So this is undoubtedly going to be a French victory, but I figured we would play the final turn, and then I can show you the map with all of the markers on there. One of the things I kind of dislike about this system, there are some things I really like, but one of the things I dislike about this system is how marker heavy it tends to turn into, with especially with disorganization, and the stacks get rather large with markers. So that's just something you should be aware of if you're going to play it, kind of mechanically taxing. But the unit count is pretty low, so it's not too bad. We are going to play the 6 p.m. turn. The French did win the initiative. That's why they don't have any of their disorganized markers. You'll notice that when you pull back from the line, you give the opponent the ability to reorganize for free, which makes total sense if you're not in immediate combat. So let's finish this out, and then we'll talk about it. All right, well, here we are at the end. Turn 8, 6 p.m. turn. It ends with a French tactical victory, which is pretty historical, actually. Both sides suffered about the same amount of losses, but the Imperial Army was kind of pushed aside and routed as they were here. You could see that if they decided to keep fighting into the sunset, it would be quite nasty. We have this pocket of Imperial infantry, the center, who actually played very strongly the whole game. They were really tough fighters, and actually on the final turn we did get an exchange of volleys and then an assault by these Saxon infantry. Actually routed and reduced this big French line infantry here. So, but ultimately the French didn't suffer any formation demoralizations. They didn't actually lose a single unit. A lot of casualties, but like this one, he took 4 hits. But he's such a big unit that he's still on the map. This guy here took 2 hits. Actually, sorry, the unit below him, I'm double stacking these right here. He took 2 hits. So there's casualties under the French line here, but none of them eliminated, and none of the formations demoralized, whereas the Imperials, both flanks completely demoralized. The casualties here very, very high. And so that's the end. So this was my first playthrough of this system from Via Victis and Nicholas Strategos. And it was interesting, having played now, this is the 3rd game from Age of Reason Battles games that I have played. There's some interesting comparing and contrasting happening here, but I'll save that for a future video, other than to say that I think it bears much more resemblance to Piacenza than it does to Camposanto, if you watch those videos. So let's talk about the system. So first of all, there's the rules. which are, the more I played, the more I got familiar with them, and most of the stuff you need is in there. There's still a few gray areas where either the translation or the detail is not quite what you would want it to be. You're just going to have to house rule some very minor things, edge case stuff that's really deep into the process of playing. But they're not terrible. I did have to go back to the rules quite a bit while I was playing. I don't really like that. So it's not the most intuitive system to play. I feel like I got Piacenza down pretty quickly in terms of how to play it after, you know, the first couple of turns. But I was looking at the rule book for this almost every turn to make sure I was doing something correctly. And the biggest problem, I think, is because this player aid, while it is great, does not include everything you need. None of the rally modifiers are on here. So I was constantly flipping back to the rule book to see what the rally modifiers were and what the demoralization modifiers were. There needs to be something on this sheet about rally and demoralization. I wish that it was, because you have the results of like failed morale checks from combat, but you don't have it for rally, and rally happens first every turn. So it's just a huge oversight, I feel like, which makes it annoying to play in that regard. The unit activation here is very similar to the Library of Napoleonic Battles. So there's like, it borrows a lot, or like it uses a lot of the same mechanics you find in other eras of game. So like when you roll for your leaders, so the command and control here is a little bit more involved than it was in Piacenza. If your army commander, if your wing commanders are in range of your army commander, they roll at with a -1 to activate, so it's more likely that they activate. And you're trying to hit the target number here, so this guy was a 3. Very similar to Library of Napoleonic Battles. If you're out of command of your army commander, it actually doesn't really matter too much. You still roll, and it's just you're rolling against that number. So it's not like the command and control here is super strict in terms of like its effect on things. It does matter for maneuver. So if you fail your command roll, then your units can only move half. But once the battle lines are in contact, you're going to be doing very little maneuver. And that is one area where I think the game does a pretty good job of simulating linear warfare. It becomes very static very quickly because of the way that you want to protect your flanks. So unlike other games that cover this era, where they might necessitate through some sort of rule that you must stay in line, you're incentivized in this game to stay in line because you don't want to get flanked. Very similar to Campo Santo, but more so here because the modifiers for attacks are very punitive. Like if you get flanked, it's very bad. So you want to make sure that you're in line whenever possible. As you saw in the game as the Imperials, I was trying to keep the line, you know, not give the French any breakthroughs. I was pulling back when I felt like the French were getting some momentum. And incidentally, pulling back is somewhat difficult in this game. You can only really move backwards. You can voluntarily move backwards out of an enemy zone of control if you're faced off against them, but it uses up half your movement points. And then from there, all you can really do is change facing or retreat another hex while retaining your facing. So you're moving kind of forward and backwards in sort of like a very linear orthogonal way. And that does sort of simulate the linear warfare thing, the linear warfare period. The part that I felt was, I don't know. To me, there are parts of this that feel a bit like musket and pike. So there's like a good side and a bad side. So like the good side is like the good thing that I really appreciate about this design is all the different unit types. So you've got line infantry, and you've got like fire by platoon infantry, which I can't find it right now, probably under here. Yeah, so there's like a fire by platoon infantry. You've got different types of cavalry. You've got dragoons, those are light infantry. You've got pistol-armed cavalry, but you've also got line cavalry. So there's a lot of different unit types, and that makes the combat matrix really interesting. So it took me a second to realize that when you're firing in this game, fire combat is not based on your combat strength. It's literally just based on your unit type. No matter how many hits you've taken, more or less, you're always just going to roll on the column that your unit is. Now, the modifiers here, it does get harder as units get ground down. So if your morale drops, and a lot of times units' morale will drop to 3 or less when they're on their backside, or you're disordered or disorganized, or if you have high morale, you add here. So it really does feel like good units are more effective at their fire, and we saw that with the French line infantry as they, disrupted the Imperial center. They were just, quite a lot better with their morale values. So I really like this. I really like that the different tactical doctrines of the different unit types are just built into the combat system, which is cool. But the downside of that is that when you come to something like melee, for example, there are so many modifiers. I still have not memorized this whole thing. I had to look every time. I got the basic ones, the ratio, the morale difference, the flanking, right? But like different types of cavalry against other cavalry, there's different modifiers. If you are disorganized, and then also on top of that, if your formation is demoralized, there's modifiers. Grenadiers and dragoons have their own special modifiers. So it's a little difficult and there's also modifier bonus icons on some of the units. So it's a little difficult to keep track of all of that. And so when you have so many unit types and how they interact with each other, it is not quite as clean as I would have liked it to have been. It didn't ever stick to me in my mind. This scenario in particular, terrain didn't play a huge role. We're fighting in a giant open field, so there was very little terrain that I had to deal with. But some of the terrain can affect your... Oops, let's zoom back out. Some of the terrain can affect your cohesion and whatnot. And like I said earlier, you know, there's a lot of marker clutter in this game. So you're constantly putting markers on units when you're being disorganized, only to then next turn probably have them come off when you rally. So it's a lot of back and forth with that. If you've played great campaigns in the American Civil War, you're probably used to that. Or maybe other battle games like Great Battles of History. There's a lot of marker manipulation. Here, you're going to find that as well. I'm less of a fan of that. As I play more and more battle games, I'm more and more impressed with games that tend to get away with less marker clutter. And I felt like Piacenza was a good one where it didn't have too much. So that's something that you might want to be aware of. But then the other thing I was going to say about the unit types is that it did feel a bit like musket and pike sometimes, where you had like these pistol cavalry who were able to fire specifically only when they're attacking infantry, but there was way less limitations around melee. As there was in Piacenza, where a convincing argument was made that in this era that melee, bayonet charges were only done against units in cover. Here, you could just melee back and forth and clear terrain, which, I don't know. Your view on that will determine how well you believe this simulation. And also, the whole like offensive fire as you're charging infantry, it felt like cavalry were not as easily bullied by infantry as I felt that they probably should be. Cavalry could always retreat when infantry approached them, but there was actually no downside to approaching infantry with your cavalry, and that wasn't done in this period as often as this game would make you think. As long as you receive the defensive fire and you're not displaced, you can then attack, and frequently with your pistol cavalry, you can fire offensively before melee. So that felt a little too easy to me, that cavalry could deform and disorganize infantry so easily. But maybe I'm wrong. And if there's anyone out there who's like really knowledgeable about this period, I would love to know your thoughts about the interactions between cavalry and infantry in this period versus like how easy it was. Other than that, I enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed playing it. I am excited to play the other battle, Hochstadt, which is on the other side of this map, and explore this system further. Kind of like Jour de Gloire, I do feel like repeated plays gets you in kind of a groove, and that's a very Via Victis thing with all of their game designs. I feel like I should play this next scenario immediately so I don't forget the rules, because I think I'll have a much easier time with it. And I'm also interested to see how the Austrians stack up against the French in that one. So anyways, this game is Les Batailles de Louis XIV, Hochstadt and Speyerbach, 1703, from the War of Spanish Succession. This came out from Via Victis late last year, or possibly early this year. It is part of a series. There are, I think, Via Victis issues that contain other battles in this system. And obviously, as I mentioned up front, there is a really old game about the War of Austrian Succession that contains a couple battles as well. So I haven't seen too much coverage of this system, but it is fairly well supported. And, I'm glad that we get so many options for Age of Reason combat that aren't bar, because that's a huge thing to bite off, both the scale and the amount of rules and stuff. So this felt like a pretty good medium ground. This is going to be for the people who like Great Battles of History, who like Men of Iron, who like Jour de Gloire, sort of that mid-weight tactical battle game, musket and pike, that kind of thing. This is, if you're looking for something in that space that is this era, that has a lot of content for it out there, then I think you should take a look at this, because it's not too bad. I enjoyed it. It wasn't not my favorite necessarily, but it was pretty good.